Welcome back, everyone. The Economic Community of West African States lifted economic sanctions on Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso on Saturday. ECOWAS suspension came after extensive discussions at an extraordinary summit on the political, peace and security situation in the region at the State House in Abuja by the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government. They also agreed to suspend financial transactions and freeze the country's assets in external banks. Tonight, let's speak with Ambassador Elijah Onyagwa, former Nigerian ambassador to Burundi, on the implications of ECOWAS lifting of sanctions on Niger and others. Ambassador, good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's so good to see you.
My pleasure. Good evening to Nigerians and good evening to you.
Right. Before we get into this very critical conversation, I think it's important for me to read out this 707 economic sanctions that have been lifted. ECOWAS lifted the travel ban on members of the military junta and their families, lifted the freezing of all financial transactions between ECOWAS states and Niger, including transactions relating to the bloc central bank, and the freezing of all of Niger's assets at EDID. Suspended sanctions on the election of Mali citizens to ECOWAS positions and for others, I think. So, I mean, after 7 months, this is happening. What do you make of this?
I'm struggling to hear you. It's not very clear.
So, these sanctions have finally been lifted. What do you make of this?
Okay, I assume actually, I think I heard you speak about the challenge with ECOWAS and the 3 countries, that had their sanctions recently lifted by ECOWAS over last weekend, I think, at the extraordinary summit, of the heads of state of ECOWAS that took place here in Abuja. And I believe that's what you're asking as to what I make of it. First of all is that it's a very worrying situation at the time when the sanctions was placed on them. And sanctions are basically, you don't place sanctions just for the fun of it or just because you want sanctions to be placed. Sanctions is basically an instrument that you use to get a country that has, behaved in a certain way to, you use sanctions to call them to order. And I believe that what ECOWAS did at the time was to try and find a way of getting these juntas to find a way to work out what kind of solution that were going to be available for the people of the country and, of course, to an extent, the people of the West African region. And what has happened as far as, I'm concerned is that they had looked at the situation, ECOWAS looked at the situation and felt that the imposition of the sanctions, limiting their financial transactions, restricting travel movements for the juntas and their families, etc., were one of the things they could do to put them under pressure to either return power to military rule or to find a way forward out of the quagmire that obviously the 3 countries had at the time. And of course, there were a couple of issues, and the complaints of these countries includes the fact that they felt that there has been external influence on them over the years. All of us have, know the kind of role some of the European countries like France have played in these countries over the years. And they felt that, the junta stepping in was more like standing up to these European countries that has, they've had issues with over time. But as far as the other ECOWAS nations were concerned, ECOWAS were looking at the fact that there has to be a democracy, that these countries must have democratic governments. It doesn't matter how they, they express their views. Whatever they want or whatever challenges that they find, even with the countries that they were more or less revolting against, the European countries and those external interests and influences, that it was the best thing to express those grievances in a formal democratic setting. And that obviously gave rise to their intention to create a confederation, which they call the AOSS, the Alliance for the Sahel States, basically saying that 3 of them, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, were going to come together to find a way, just to run, obviously they had a meeting and then they declared that they have actually pulled out of ECOWAS. obviously, this was also a hasty decision, in my opinion, because there are a lot of issues involved. The treaty that was signed about 48, 49 years ago had, steps that you must take before you can pull out of ECOWAS. And the timeline was meant to be a year, and even at that, even within that year that you have given that notice, certain things you are, as a country, you are also supposed to keep your own side of the bargain within the period, after which you can now be allowed to exit. The challenges that they cited at the time was that the founding fathers, that the vision of the founding fathers had been grossly eroded, and of course they also cited betrayal, saying that ECOWAS was under pressure from the foreign interests to ensure that the juntas are out of their way. Those are the reasons that they actually gave. But again, in a fatherly role, I think one of the founding fathers, President Gowon, actually came into town and had a meeting with, President Tinubu. And I believe that as part of the recommendation was to sit down, call for that meeting, find a way to give them a soft landing in such a way that you can say, okay, you know what, let's just leave these sanctions and find, a way to work out, what will work for both, for the Confederation and of course for the Commission as well. And I believe that what they did at the time, last week was also right, because they've looked at the situation, they've found out that it's important to, there's something called the carrot and stick approach. You've actually threatened them more or less to say that this is what you want to do by sanctions. And they've also responded to say, listen, we also have an option. We can also get out, of ECOWAS, which is in itself, it's going to be a huge challenge because these three countries are landlocked countries. Niger obviously does most of their importation through Nigeria and through some other countries that have water bodies. The same also with Burkina Faso and Mali, as the case may be. So clearly, there's that confusion that exists in there. But I believe that what has happened now is the right thing to do. Lift the sanctions, ensure that you create a soft landing for both the ECOWAS and even for the juntas as well, so that they can now begin to attend meetings. The Commission can now begin to sit down with them and find a workable solution. Because the people here are the issue, the people of these countries. If you go to Niger Republic, for example, Niger and Nigeria are like Siamese twins. We've had a long-lasting relations. We give them power. Quite a lot has happened. In fact, Nigerians have relatives in Niger as well. So how do you just wake up one morning and, you have the sanctions and you're saying that they can no longer travel, or if they want to travel, they need another kind of passport and all of these kind of issues. So as far as I'm concerned, ECOWAS have actually, if you like, extended an olive branch to these three countries. And I believe that they will take it, even though at this point in time, it's not very clear what their position is, because I know that there's that feeling of betrayal on, since they took over power. So obviously, there will be a lot of negotiation back and forth, but I believe that what ECOWAS have done in their last, meeting here in Abuja is a step in the right direction. And I also expect that on their own part, these three countries will now come back to the meeting and then begin to re-engage with ECOWAS. I know that some, you can, say that trust has been broken, but whatever be the case, there will always be diplomatic solutions to addressing these issues.
Positive outcome of this decision. Would you say ECOWAS regretted its actions? And do you think lifting these sanctions will bring those countries back to the sub-regional body?
I didn't hear what you just said.
Ambassador, did you get me? Right, so would you say, based on all of what you've said this evening, would you say ECOWAS regretted its actions? And do you also think lifting the sanctions will bring those countries back to the sub-regional body?
Well, I guess you're talking about if ECOWAS is regretting the decision they made. Is that the point you're trying to, is that the question?
Its actions.
I didn't get the question. Are you talking about ECOWAS regretting the decision they made?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, I actually talked about it because what I said was that there are schools of thought that can be saying, or that obviously says that ECOWAS was hasty in their decision to go ahead and sanction these three countries without thoroughly understanding the challenges that they are facing. The school of thought is there. But I can also tell you that sanctions are international practices. Some of, most of the countries in the world have had one kind of issue or the other. What, once you have the leadership, what the leadership will obviously sit down to do is to find a way of getting them back to the table. Like I said, sanctions are not for the sake of it. Sanctions are not because you just want to, sanction a country. What you do basically is to say, we will not allow you to do this, 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 and this. And the reason is because we want to get you to the table to discuss. We want to get you to the table to say, how do we solve this, resolve this impasse that exists? So that is the problem. But again, I am not in a position to say whether that was a right or wrong decision at that point. Like, I have had a lot of opinions on this that obviously talked about the fact that it was a hasty decision. But clearly, if you look at it from the point of view of these three countries, they are saying that they've had issues with these countries and that they feel betrayed by the actions of ECOWAS. Whether that is right or wrong is a different matter altogether. But I know that ECOWAS stands for democracy. There are countries, even in this 15 member states, a country like Senegal has never witnessed a coup d'etat since the formation of ECOWAS. In fact, since they got their independence, they've never witnessed a coup d'etat. And the treaty is such that there are guidelines to doing certain things. The leaders of these 15 member states right now were not the people that founded ECOWAS. There were protocols, there were treaties and agreements that were signed before this regional body was established. And democracy is one of them. We cannot have a military junta. Whatever grievances we have, whatever challenges we have, it is expected that we will find a legal and legitimate democratic way of addressing those grievances. And as far as I'm concerned, what has happened now, which is what we need to be looking at, is the fact that ECOWAS have gone ahead to impose those sanctions. They have responded back to say that they are pulling out. Remember, there are Nigerians that live in these three countries. There are other West African, people from other West African states that reside in these three countries as well. So businesses are involved, individuals are involved, and they've extended that olive branch to them to say that, listen, let's get back to the drawing board, let's get back to the table and begin to talk. They've even invited them in some of the technical meetings that are taking place in ECOWAS. So my belief is that they need to respond right now, and they need to come back to say, yeah, whatever the issues are, like I said, they have their grievances, and they have expressed their grievances. But I believe that most of these problems are diplomatic challenges, and I believe that there will always be diplomatic channels towards addressing those problems.
All right, Ambassador, let's go on a break, and when we come back, we will continue this conversation. This is Politics Tonight, everyone. We'll take a break now, and we will be right back. Please stay with us.